Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. So as I think you all know, Jack is a co-founder of Colony, which is a much anticipated component of the decentralized ecosystem. For those of you who don't know, Jack, in a former life, was a high-end jeweler. And Jack is now working very hard to create a gem for this space. I think it's fair to say that Jack has a reputation of being a very thoughtful participant in this space. So we're very lucky to have him here today and hear some of his thoughts on governance. Governance is a word that we hear used a lot. It's been used already this morning several times. People have spoken about it as something very important. Most projects list it as a key thing they're working on. It's a Twitter all the time. It's a topic at conferences as well. Jack, what does governance mean?
That's a very good question. It's, I think, a fairly nebulous term, which is used in all sorts of different ways, and I don't know that there's really consensus on what it means in a decentralized context. I think it's being used in different ways and people understand it differently. So I think in general, of course, it's the process by which things get done, how decisions get made, how an organization defines what it's going to accomplish and the means by which that's going to happen. I think in a decentralized context, that can mean a variety of different things, from the ways in which a decision is made about whether a hard fork is going to take place on Bitcoin, for instance, to more granular decisions even around a decentralized project like Colony is working on. And the fine-grainedness of that is really, I think, what an interesting question is around how governance is accomplished in a decentralized fashion.
And we'll get more into that with respect to Colony. But just before that, another kind of foundational question. I think it's possible that some people in all of the fundraising kind of concentration of the last year or so have forgotten, or maybe some people aren't even aware, that all this blockchain stuff is really about decentralization. Why is governance an important part of decentralization?
Well, if you've got a decentralized network, software, whatever it may be, that is something which is, I suppose, is owned by everybody who uses that network, who, if it has a token, who uses or owns that token, who contributes to the development of it. So you need mechanisms by which decisions pertaining to that common interest can be made. We have a variety of means of doing so at the moment. Often the day-to-day decisions and actions are being made by either some core developers or a foundation in the case of Ethereum. But the sort of larger decisions there needs to be a way of arriving at what those are and then making them, which is the process that we currently have. But of course it's important for a community to be able to make those decisions together somehow.
And I think when we spoke before, you were talking about the kind of the state of the world now and the centralization of power around siloed data, and that the decentralized world is really trying to move away from that. But then the participants in that want the ability to influence changes to that software, for example, that they're using.
Right, but I think that's a necessary part of any functional decentralized system. Right. I don't think that you can have a decentralized system where there is no leadership, for instance, even if it's informal. I think that's will be a necessary emergent consequence always. So the question is, I suppose, the extent to which those influencers have direct control over decisions. Yeah. And I think that's probably an arguable point as to whether they do or not.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that more when we talk about Colony, because I think that really gets to the nub, is how do you distribute influence ability. So let's turn to Colony now, Jack.
Sure.
Just in a few sentences, first of all, what is Colony for the benefit of everyone here?
So Colony is what we call a platform for open organizations. The idea is that people will be able to create organizations, they'll be able to govern their organizations or projects, companies, whatever you want to call them, without needing to know or trust the other people who are participating. Yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Okay. And so let's talk about governance then. What is the governance system that you've come up with for Colony?
So we think that for truly decentralized governance to happen, you need to have a way by which influence is derived in a decentralized way. So traditionally in the company you have some founders and they set a sort of C-suite in place, and really all influence and decision making flows down from them and the board that eventually emerges. You can't really do that in any meaningful way if you don't actually know that the people who are participating in an organization are even people. All you know is that they're an address on the blockchain, and you can't arrive at any identity of those people without relying on some kind of centralized oracle identifying who they are, which, if we're trying to make as close to a trustless system as possible, of course we need to avoid. So Colony enables decision-making, the influence, the seniority over decisions to be made to emerge from the bottom up as a consequence of the implicit agreement that the behavior undertaken by individuals within an organization was acceptable and in fact was good. So basically the more stuff people do and the more their peers believe that what they did was good, the more influence they're going to have over decision making pertaining to the areas in which they've been able to demonstrate competence.
So let's break that down a little bit.
Sure.
Can you give us just a very kind of high-level example of a decision? So a group of people have come together on the platform to
Right.
work on a project.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what would be a good example to build a website or some
Let's-
other example that you would like to choose. And just run us through a very high level, what would be an example of a decision or an influence that somebody could impact and how they would go about doing that?
So it typically works by actually work being defined. So that's kind of the key governance process. Is so let's say we've got an app that we're building on.
Mm-hmm.
There is some decision, let's say it's a very simple decision, that we need a new identity to be created. So I'm somebody who's got some design background, so I suggest, well, we should be creating this new identity and it's going to have a budget associated with it. And I'm going to assign somebody to do this work because I think, Bill is a good designer. And then when the work is complete, I'm going to evaluate it. And I was able to set that work because over time I've demonstrated that I have some expertise in that area within the context of the colony that we're part of. So because of that, I'm able to direct the flow of the funds of the organization to that project. Because really, in order to, governance has got to have teeth. You can't have decisions without execution necessarily following from it.
Okay.
And that is something which is quite difficult to do in a completely decentralized way unless you're actually controlling how the money is moving.
Right. And how many people does it take in order for that flow or that decision to be made? Can one individual do it themselves? Do they need to get some others to go along with them?
It really depends on the amount of reputation which is in play, and reputation is an attribute which is associated with an account in Colony and earned as a consequence of people doing stuff. So it depends how much reputation there exists within the Colony, the amount of reputation that I have, and the cost of doing that. So the more expensive it's going to be to do, the more of the funding I need to direct to make that happen, the more influence I'm going to need to have. So it may be that I don't have all of the necessary influence to do that, so I need to get you to back me up, for instance.
And one of the things, when we talked about this before, one of the things that you emphasized was that this is not a majority decision system.
Right.
So this is not a group vote where it's 75% or 51% of the vote is one person or two people, if they have enough influence that they've accumulated, could direct the flow of these funds.
Right, absolutely. Because no organization works by people voting on whether somebody's going to get their taxi fare from last week refunded, right? You can't have a vote on every little decision that gets made. So you need the people who have been defined as having the expertise within an organization to just be able to get on with their work. Yeah. So in all cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, decisions are implicit, and it's only if somebody actively objects to some decision that's been made, some funding that's been deployed or proposed to be deployed, that a vote may be called.
So this is very interesting. You have made the decision to give quite a bit of flexibility and fluidity, empowering people to make decisions without group consensus, and then the check against that being the challenge process.
Correct.
So can you walk us through a little bit the challenge process? How does that work then?
Sure. So again, let's say that we're in a colony together. I have created some funding proposal that you believe to be malfeasant. You were incentivized to come along and challenge me on that because I've placed a stake down on that proposal. So you can come along, challenge that by placing the stake down yourself, and I can either match that or I can back down. If I back down, you kind of win immediately. If I don't, it goes to arbitration, and other people are required to vote on it.
So one of the things you mentioned there, and we're going to just breeze through this stuff.
Sure.
It's an absolute crime to have to cover this stuff so quickly, but you mentioned staking. So it becomes very expensive for somebody to challenge something.
It becomes expensive for somebody to not to challenge it,
but to lose.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because
so,
they then lose their stake.
Right.
And so this is where we see then a dovetailing of token economics and governance, where the
Absolutely.
incentivization mechanism.
Exactly. So the whole idea is that you create what approaches a robust crypto economic system of incentives and disincentives, so that the expected value of cheating is less than the expected cost of being found out.
So there are maybe people in the audience who are working on projects where they're designing governance, or folks who will see the video. Tell us a little bit about the process by how did you come to this particular bespoke governance solution for Colony?
Well, I think that in Colony we're trying to design a very generalized system. So when it's possible that the process for designing a governance system for any particular protocol may differ.
Sure.
But I would say that the important considerations are certainly around whether it's going to be game theoretically secure, obviously, but also you have to factor in the legal limitations as well. Right. So that's a really important consideration.
I think you said when we spoke before that you don't end up designing the most beautiful or the most ideal system because you are bringing in real-world considerations.
Absolutely. I mean, there's always design constraints in any project, right? So yeah, you have to factor them all in, and the sort of engineering aesthetics is not necessarily the only one that you have to adhere to. And
you emphasized to me multiple times that this is a very hard problem, a very complex problem.
Right.
What are, if you can just list them, we can't go into them, but what are some of the things that, some of the counter-arguments to kind of group intelligence, or some of the concerns that you had to bear in mind as you design a governance system?
Right, well, if you're getting into anything where people are voting and collective intelligence or wisdom of the crowd is being used to arrive at a decision, you need to try and think about, to some extent, a lot of the cognitive biases that can come into play. Confirmation bias and groupthink and sort of conformity pressure and things like that. And so where possible, it's nice to be able to design a system that counters that. In Colony specifically, we have, for instance, in voting, a commit and reveal phase, which means that people can't see what other people are voting.
Yeah.
So there's no incentive or there's no ability for them to try and vote in the right direction. But also there's no incentive for them to do so. So that avoids what's known as a Keynesian beauty contest, where people are incentivized to vote in the same direction that they think everybody else will. Unfortunately, what you can't control within a cryptoeconomic protocol is what people do off-chain and out of band. So that's where I think that some of the challenges will lie. But at the same time, you kind of want people to be able to discuss and signal their intent around things. Right. So it's really a fine balancing act, and we'll see what happens. I don't think there's any such thing as a perfect governance system. So.
Well, one final question, Jack. I mean, this is obviously incredibly complex, incredibly important, and very challenging. And it is a big undertaking. I would say potentially even an audacious thing to attempt to design something like this. It's arguably the realm of gods and kings. You know, what makes you optimistic that these efforts to design governments and then ultimately the governance systems themselves will be successful?
I think the fact that we've done it before probably gives me some hope that we'll do it again. Yeah, we're building on top of a lot of thinking that has preceded us, and I don't know that we have got all the answers as a project in Colony, but our company is called Collectively Intelligent, and I think that no one or small group of us has got all the answers, but together as we will figure it out in time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jack. It's been a pleasure talking with you.